But let's start with one very important principle. Probably a lot of you will know this principle Airbnb is famous for. It's this principle, do things which do not scale. Yeah? So in the startup world, this is very famous now. Would be interesting, could you describe this principle a little bit from the perspective of Airbnb?
Yeah, so this is a principle that's really part of Airbnb's DNA. It came from our time, this was before I joined, but when Airbnb was in Y Combinator with the 3 founders. And the principle itself, do things that do not scale, is really from the founders of Y Combinator, the startup accelerator in San Francisco. And for Airbnb, it was a really important turning point for the company. When they joined Y Combinator, they were encouraged to really look at their user base. And the founders noticed they did have a group in New York that was successful on the platform. And they noticed that the users that had better photos were doing better in terms of bookings. They decided to go to New York and learn more about the host community there and decided, hey, let's actually go out and take pictures so that we can help get these hosts on the platform and get more bookings. So the founders rented a camera, went around to the host's apartment, took pictures, helped them up-level the merchandising that they had for their home online, and they saw a return in bookings that increased. Does this scale? No. The founders can't go around and take pictures in everyone's apartments. And at that point in time, most people had like flip phone cameras and stuff like that. So there was a lot of challenges in terms of how you get better pictures. But through that, we learned a lot. And they moved next to actually hiring professional photographers regionally that Airbnb paid for. And anytime anyone put a home on the platform, they had photographers go out and take the photos, which really helped grow the platform. And we don't do that today. We have over 7 million properties online. That's impossible for us to have professional photographers go out. But the things that we learned through that process of doing that initial concept that didn't scale really taught us how to operationalize it and make it scale in the long term so that we had really high quality listings on the platform. And that, through the time in Y Combinator and because of what the founders learned and also because of their design background, 2 of our founders are designers, it's really stayed part of the DNA of Airbnb. And we think about it now, what we call it is the imagining the ideal outcome and then working backwards. So we first start with that ideal outcome, even though it may be really broad, it may feel like it's not possible, and then work backwards and start really small and figure out how to actually make it possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this was now this overall principle. So from the startup time at Airbnb, when the founders were out in New York. So this is a famous story. But how do you use this principle now exactly in product development and Airbnb? How can we picture that a little bit?
Yeah. So it goes back to that imagining the ideal outcome and then working backwards. And one of the key pieces is for you to really stretch your mind first, to look for that really futuristic, visionary, ideal outcome that may feel impossible. It first gives you a chance to stretch your mind before you bring in the constraints, before you bring in the limiting factors. And it's a little bit different because we don't always like to imagine things that we can't imagine how to do. And in this case, it's like one part of your brain is stretching and imagining that ideal outcome. You're giving a chance for the idea to thrive. And then once you learn and do the small things, you actually figure out how to operationalize it. And we talk about it almost like it's 2 different parts of your brain, or potentially different people. Some people are really great at the vision setting and the forward-looking. Other people are really great at how we operationalize and scale. And this has been one of the key parts that also led for the launch of experiences. We use that same principle in terms of how to incubate and launch the new business line when Airbnb expanded beyond homes.
I think that's interesting that you say that if you have a big team, like at Airbnb, that you can put these things in different teams, yeah? That you can say, so the one team should stretch your mind, have this vision, and then the others can start to operationalize it, yeah? That's interesting, because I have the experience, when I start projects, it's really hard to stretch your mind all the time, really to think, what's the perfect outcome for the customer, yeah? So it's interesting if you could divide this into different team categories there.
Yeah. It's different skill sets, I think, for different product managers is something we've learned. And Some product managers are really good at the ideation stage when it's brand new, when you're searching for product market fit. Other product managers come in really good at building, so there's some signal of product market fit. How do we take that further? And then other product managers are really good at the scale. So now that we found product market fit, how do we actually really magnify it and go big? And so it's interesting to see. I know I really like the build and scale piece of it, but it's been really interesting for me to see the ideation and this, I'm imagining the ideal outcome, especially at Airbnb.
So could we go a little bit deeper, more in the details of one or two product features at Airbnb, and where you use this principle and how that looked like? Yeah.
So when I was in the experiences business, there were two main pieces that we were focusing on. So the experience business itself launched in 2016, in the fall of 2016 at the LA Airbnb Open. And it had been in incubation for a little bit at that point and then launched to the public. We first launched in 10 cities, then went to scale to go to over 1,000 cities globally. And that's when I joined the team. So it was at the point where we were expanding beyond the 10 cities and going very broad and very global, and then also trying to go very deep into each city. And at that point in time, we were focusing on two different things where I think this principle was really demonstrated. The first one I'll talk through is the concept of quality. The experiences business is a managed marketplace, so every experience that comes on the platform is vetted or screened in some way, shape, or form. When we first started the business, especially when it was in incubation, the way we did that is employees actually went on every single experience that was going to be on the platform to vet it, to see if it was something that met our quality standards in terms of what we wanted on the platform. We go back to, does that scale? I think the answer is no. The employees who got to do that had a really great time. Unfortunately, it wasn't me, because that was before I joined. But they learned a lot about what made an experience good, what were some of the things that you could look for to actually systemize this and score for quality so that we could do this at a larger scale. It was much easier to send people in the first 10 cities to make sure those launch cities were exceptional. But then when you look at today, we have 40,000 experiences on the platform. So how did we actually go from that piece that doesn't scale to getting 40,000 experiences on the platform that met our criteria? And that was some of the things that came out of the initial learning from when people went on the experiences, where what was really important is that aspect of human connection, where you have a smaller group, you're not following around a large tour group with a flag running around the city looking at the Eiffel Tower, but you're actually doing something a little bit more intimate that where you feel like you get to know your host. The other piece was having some type of expertise. So the host who is working and leading the experience had some kind of insider access or some expertise or some knowledge that made it different. So it wasn't just something that anybody could do or put on the platform, but there was a differentiation to it. And they noticed those three things, and we figured out ways to then look for those systematically when we have people apply to come onto the platform with an experience. And we've worked through a quality scoring algorithm where we not only look at the signal from when the experiences comes onto the platform, but we're also continuously getting feedback from the guests who attend the experience to be able to validate that that experience is still the quality that we're expecting, so that we're able to do this at a much bigger volume of experiences. This will continue to change. We're continuing to learn through what we've done so that we can think about, okay, when we have 1 million experiences on the platform, how do we do this? How do we do it even faster? So that the hosts can get their experiences up on the platform and we know which ones we want, and we can keep the marketplace managed in terms of the quality we're looking for.
Yeah, I followed this a little bit when you started this experience section of Airbnb, and I had the impression that it started very slowly, so that you were very careful what kind of experiences you put there. Was this the stage at the beginning where also the employees went on all these experiences?
In the very beginning, that was especially getting ready for launch. The launch in the fall of 2016 was a very big moment because Airbnb had been a homes company for 10 years at that point in time. So for us to expand into something else beyond a place to stay was a really big moment. So there was a lot of attention to make sure that those 10 launch cities were exceptional, to really show the difference and the magic in terms of what you could do when it wasn't a commodity-driven activity, but more of a personalized insider access, things that you could do that you generally would find just from knowing somebody in the city or networking, then it became a lot more available to other people. So that was definitely the time when employees were going on the experiences. And to this time, we still continue to do that. We have a program where if the experience has less than 5 reviews and it's new on the platform, we can go on the experience, any of the employees on the team, so that we're continuously doing that, but also helping the new hosts that are on the platform get established and giving them feedback. So we're still out in the market. The entire product org is doing this. So there's still pieces of that around, but then we're looking at how we actually systemize and do it at scale with a lot of the algorithms and how we measure and what questions and what signal we're trying to get to actually show which experiences are the highest quality. That then also feeds into how we surface the experiences to guests when they're searching. We want those really high quality, those really exceptional experiences to surface and really be the keystone of our platform.
Understand. So could you share some figures probably? How many experiences, new experiences go live every month now? At what scale is it?
I actually don't know that number anymore since I moved off the team, but I do know we reached a big milestone of having the 40,000 on the platform. So we went from, I think it was a couple thousand when we first launched to now 40. So it was quite a big period of growth over the last 2 years.
Okay.
But it's definitely quite a few per month, and our turnaround time for actually having the application approved is at this point less than 24 hours.
Okay. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into the tools and tactics at Airbnb. That's always interesting. We also do this in our interviews on our online platform. We ask always, what kind of tools do you use? So for me, it would be interesting when you're at the beginning and then you have defined a product vision. Yeah? How is this product vision then concretely shared and agreed on in the company? How does that work at Airbnb?
Yeah. So it goes back, our founders, again, 2 of them are designers, and a lot of the things that we do to actually capture our product vision comes from their design background. When we look at design thinking and the things that they learned, there's a lot about storytelling, storyboarding. I think the company also takes a lot of inspiration from Walt Disney in terms of like animation and drawing. And you see a lot of that and around the office. And when we talk about the vision for experiences, how we've captured that is through a lot of imagery of our hosts, especially our top hosts. They're all over the office. We have a lot of storyboards in terms of what we call the hero's journey. Our ideal is that you go on an experience and you love it so much that you go home and decide to actually host an experience of your own. And we have animation and drawings that kind of visualizes that experience that we're looking to give to every host and guest. And we also have some videos from the early days in incubation of some of the first experiences that were planned. And this was before it was launched on the platform, where part of the incubation team, they would actually go out into the Embarcadero in San Francisco and find tourists and ask them if they would let them plan a trip to San Francisco for them. So, they're going up to complete strangers and saying, hey, do you want us to plan activities for you to do in San Francisco? Some people said yes, and they planned them these really extravagant things like, bike trips or various other activities. And we're filming and taking a lot of videos of that as well to show like how transformational it could be. And so those types of things are the story or the narrative that really captures that ideal outcome. It's a lot more visual, it's a lot more storytelling than written. Yeah.
So, and this is then also distributed offline. So you said now you have it on the walls in the office that everyone can see that, or is it also done online in Google Docs or whatever? So what's the different forms there?
There's a mix. Most of our offices in San Francisco. Most of our product teams are in San Francisco, so it makes it a little bit easier to have it all on the wall. That's changing as we become more of a global company. But right now, product is still only in San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, and LA. But the teams are kind of focused on different things. So we have a lot of the customer journey maps and things like that. You'll see the teams having them on their walls and working through them together and doing design critiques and stuff like that. We do have, a lot of things in our design files. We're using Figma and Sketch. So a lot of the visualizations and some of the storyboards are in digital format that can be shared. We are also coming from the design background again, very heavy creative. We have an internal art department, and they have a lot of collateral in terms of videos and montages that we made of the hosts, and there's a whole system internally that keeps all of that, so you can have the right pieces to pull together in terms of when you're trying to communicate at a high level some of the things.
And then on the organizational part, how do you agree then on your vision? So when you have done all that, you have your visions, you have your storyboard, you made your first user research. So how are the decisions made? Who decides what gets built and what goes live?
Yeah, that's always a tough question, I think, in any product organization. It's a mix between leadership most of the time and then the individual product teams. I think the way it breaks down is leadership really understands and owns that vision component of it, and the individual product teams are on the ground with the customers every day and are looking through some of the details and the tactics on delivering some of the specifics of that vision. So it's a lot of a mix of a lot of conversations in terms of gathering evidence to show for some of these ideas, we start small. So how do we actually, for example, if we go back to quality, when we're gathering evidence that this is really important for our platform, we did that through the employees going on the initial experiences, then we're working on our quality scoring algorithms and our review system and things like that. Then we take it even a step further of, an example would be the team was seeing some results of why don't we share this information with our hosts? So we're looking at the quality, but how do we educate our hosts to help them up-level their experiences and know how they're doing so that they can actually make their experience or their business better? And we did some initial experiments to show that this would actually benefit the hosts and increase the bookings. And then if you take that back with some evidence to support the idea, then that's when we start talking in our quarterly planning of, yes, this is something that we want to really invest in and go bigger, but there's a lot of autonomy for the teams to play around and experiment with those things on a very small scale, but it goes back to those doing things that don't scale because we're not spending weeks or months on things like this. It's, quick experiments here and there that are a few days or a few weeks and doing field research that brings back those ideas that we then present and share and then invest to actually go bigger on and double down and spend more months or more weeks on it to actually bring it to life.
Okay.
And to actually bring it out into the product at scale.
Okay. So what we skipped now a little bit, I would say, is the user research stuff because we want to have some time for question and answers. But at the end, I would like to ask you something about your experiences now at Airbnb. How does your feeling for product development has changed now since your time at Airbnb? Yeah,
it's been interesting. Airbnb is definitely a design-led company, which has been a different experience for me. I started my career in finance, and so coming into design and hospitality was definitely a change. I think the key thing for me is watching that visualization happen has been really interesting. Like was mentioned before, where I really excel is that build and scale piece. So I love the operationalizing, and that's where I've spent most of my career. But it's been really interesting to be a part of a company that is so forward-looking and so visionary. And I think reflecting on it, it's not that different. Like Amazon has its way of doing this. Google has its way. Apple has its way. Steve Jobs was extremely visionary as well. And look at SpaceX and Elon Musk. It's like we're going to live on Mars. That's very forward-thinking. But it's been really interesting to watch that actually happen. And while it's not per se unique, it's definitely a unique space where you think about this vision of belonging anywhere and having magical trips powered by people. How to actually make that happen is, and watching that whole process of imagining the ideal outcome and then working backwards, especially the initial part, has been really interesting. And I think the key piece for me, the key takeaway has been when you see those crazy ideas that at first you're like, oh, that's impossible, we can't do that. That's generally been my first reaction at times, that really limits you. And then you're only looking at the next step. You're only looking at the optimizations, which isn't really the great innovation that Airbnb has been able to achieve. And so you see that difference of the innovation that comes from first really, really stretching your mind. And what it's taught me is that when you see those crazy ideas, give them a little bit of a chance to grow and explore them and think first instead of what are all the constraints and what are all the problems, but first, how might this be possible? And to really give it a chance to grow and explore it before you come in with all of the constraints. And by doing that, you're able to look much further in the future and be a lot more visionary. And then through starting small, it's very surprising what you can actually accomplish and what you can actually make possible. And that's been the biggest takeaway from my time at Airbnb is watching that happen and then really forcing myself to also let those crazy ideas thrive and asking, well, first, how might this be possible? And how might we start small and figure out a way to, as we go, to actually make this something that we can give to 1 million users or 7 million users or 1 billion users in the future.
Okay, cool. So you know now you have to have crazy ideas. I think this is a nice takeaway. Thank you, Colleen.